everybody.
Look at
thanks
that.
for coming. I think there might be some late arrivals. I'm pretty sure of that. They always arrive late or something. But anyway, those who are pretty aware that July this year is the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landings. So you might have seen a lot on TV, celebratory films, documentaries, that kind of thing, and even movies have come out called First Man. And so you perhaps heard a lot about Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin. And but there's another side to this story, which has been buzzing around for quite a few years, as long as Buzz Aldrin's been
buzzing.
And some people don't like it, but I find it very, very interesting. And for those that are obviously like yourselves, you might find it interesting too. So you might have seen this gentleman on various videos on TV, might be mentioned in magazines and things, but he's also associated with his own magazine, which I'm sure he'll tell you about as well. So it's Marcus Allen of Nexus Magazine. He's going to be talking about Apollo, fact or fiction. Put your hands together for Marcus Allen.
Wow. Thank you very much, Neil, and thank you for inviting me to present my case that Apollo never happened. Oh, I hear you say, how can you say that? Apollo never happened. Right, before we get into Apollo, we need to get into Nexus Magazine. I publish the UK edition of Nexus Magazine, comes from Australia. And as I say, there are two types of people in the world, those who read Nexus and those who are about to. This is the current issue out yesterday. No, was it? Yeah, no, Saturday. It's the UFO document leak of the century. So we cover UFOs, we cover hidden history, we cover future science, the unexplained. If you like it, if you're here now, you'll love Nexus. Back issues there, 3 for a tenner. Can't say fairer than that. Any 3, or if you take 6, that's 20. It's pretty good. Discounts for cash these days. Right, Apollo, the Apollo moon landings. Fact or fiction? The anomalies, the inconsistencies, and the unexplained details. And I could go on forever about it because there are so many of them, but we'll cover the main ones. And there are some very interesting anomalies and inconsistencies that have only recently come to light. We'll cover those. So just so we know where we are, when we are, we're 9 days after the alleged landing on the moon of Apollo 11. Celebrated around the world, oh goodness me. National Geographic have even republished their December 1969 issue. Spaceflight magazine, this is the house magazine of the British Interplanetary Society, which I gave an interesting talk at, saying it never happened. God, that caused trouble. But I'm still a member, and I was asked by the president when I went to a recent talk, Marcus, you're not going to be asking any difficult questions, are you? Because that's what I do. No, I said, no, I don't ask difficult questions. I ask challenging questions. And one question I asked, I'll come to it when we reach it in the talk, produced some very interesting information. So a challenging question is always good. Right, this is where it ended. You've just seen the cover. That's the cover. I've had it, where's it gone? I've had it for years, that particular picture. And I was rather pleased that National Geographic have got their own reprint of the magazine out in Smiths right now. The Telegraph magazine have done a copy. Time magazine have done a copy. It goes on, and you've probably been subjected to it over the last couple of weeks, the insistence that man landed on the moon. We've got the film of Apollo 11, which I went to see in the IMAX cinema to get the full immersive experience. Oh, God. You're immersed in loud music, quick editing, and propaganda. That's what you're watching. I went to see First Man, the story of Neil Armstrong, taken from the book of the same title, First Man. The book is interesting in that it recounts Armstrong's flying career. He's a very good pilot. It recounted his flying career in considerable detail, with a great deal of attention to the flights that he was involved with. He was also a Navy pilot in the Vietnam War. He had 55 kills to his name. He was asked to join NASA He wasn't. He didn't apply for it. He asked to join NASA. Now here's a question: where is Neil Armstrong died in 2012? Where is he buried? Where would you expect him to be buried? An American hero. Arlington National Cemetery, possibly, where presidents get buried, American heroes get buried, Charles Lindbergh, for instance. No, Armstrong is buried at sea off the coast of Florida because he didn't want a fuss made. He's a naval pilot, so legitimately he could request a burial at sea. But it seems a bit strange. It does to me. I'm forever finding strange things to do with Apollo. Let's go back to the beginning. This is where it all started. In 1961, President John Kennedy had been president for just 4 months at this point. And here is Yuri Gagarin, that's Nikita Khrushchev. Yuri Gagarin had allegedly been the first man in orbit. Whether he was or not, it doesn't really matter. Everybody believed he was. So John Kennedy had to do something about it. Hence the famous speech, "We'll land a man on the moon before the decade is out and return him safely to the Earth." At that time, the only American who had been into space was Alan Shepard. He'd gone up 100 miles and come straight down again. They didn't know they could do it. It was a big mystery. Kennedy had made, it's a political announcement. It wasn't scientific. You have to put Apollo into the context of its time. The space race, which was an invention of the media, it sells newspapers and magazines, as we've seen. The Cuban Missile Crisis came along in 1962, October 1962. A year later, John Kennedy is killed. Whoops. The Vietnam War, following Kennedy's death, was ramping up. The year after he was killed, the increase in the American troops into Vietnam was started, and by the time it had finished, 10 years later, 58,000 Americans were dead, 3 million Vietnamese were dead. Hundreds of square miles of the country were devastated by Agent Orange, which is defoliant. We're still seeing the effects of that on the Vietnamese side. That is the price you pay for incompetence. Why was the Vietnam War started? What was it about? Nobody actually could tell you what it was about. The domino theory is the favorite thing. If Vietnam falls to communism, Laos will, Cambodia will, Thailand will. We can't afford that. So we have to get into Vietnam and wreck the place, and then it won't happen. Bit of trivia. The Vietnam War was allegedly started because of the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Gulf of Tonkin is off the coast of Vietnam, where American naval forces were patrolling, and the reports were that a torpedo boat had attacked the American fleet. The commander of the American fleet was a gentleman by the name of Admiral George Morrison. You may know his son, Jim Morrison, lead singer of The Doors. If you start getting into the connection between the intelligence services and the music business, you'll find a particularly interesting correlation of many of these people. Anyway, that's a piece of trivia. So we had the student riots against the Vietnam War. People were being killed. I mean, shot. Real bullets. Robert Kennedy assassinated, Martin Luther King assassinated. The place was falling apart. It needed a distraction, so let's go to the moon. That'll distract everybody. And so you're going to have a space program now. Mercury, 1 man in space. Gemini, 2 men in space. Apollo, 3 men in space. Skylab, about 4 or 5. Shuttle, about 7. ISS, well, that's still there now. The Orion craft, we'll come to that later. Now, how many people here have heard of and know where the X-37B goes?
It's a shuttle.
It's a small version of the shuttle. It's unmanned. Its last mission was 712 days in space. Where did it go? Nobody knows. Who pays for it? Nobody knows. Its previous mission was 515 days. It could get to Mars and back in that time. I don't know if it does or not, because nobody knows where it goes. So let's not have any more stories about you can't keep secrets. There's the X-37B. It's unmanned. I don't even know it's got any cameras on board. But if you're going to go to the moon, you need a good piece of kit. This is the kit. This is the Apollo craft. This is the lander. in two sections. Lower section with a big rocket there to slow it down. This is where the astronauts were, and this is the service module which contained all the bits and stuff that they needed. There's the Saturn V rocket. It's called a Saturn V, by the way, because it has 5 engines. Simple. Now, on the Gemini mission, here we have a Gemini craft. They all landed in the Atlantic. But what's this? Now, some people can tell that this is an aerial of some sort. You can see it's just landed. These are the astronauts. They're the 2 frogmen helping them out. But when they swam to the craft, they weren't carrying that. It wouldn't have been on the craft as it came back through the atmosphere. It would have burnt off. I don't know what it is, but it's a mystery. Oh, by the way, everything I say can be debunked, according to online websites, because I don't know enough to be able to explain it properly. So it's all been debunked, so rubbish. I'll tell you what's been debunked, because we've got to start with the camera now. If you're going to go to the moon, you want to take some nice pictures. This is the camera that was chosen to take it, and it's a very appropriate camera to choose. The Hasselblad 500 EL, made by Victor Hasselblad of Sweden. It had an electric motor drive at the bottom here to advance the film. It carried 150 exposure film in the detachable magazine, and it had a big lens on the front. And you see where it was mounted on the front of the spacesuits. That's Alan Shepard, that's Neil Armstrong, and that's the camera you can go into a shop today and buy. They haven't changed the design very much. The shutter button is on the front of the camera. Guess what? You can't see it from inside your spacesuit. The exposure indicator, have you taken a picture? Because in space, nobody can hear you scream, therefore you can't hear any sound, therefore you don't know if you pressed the button. And even if you had pressed the button, it won't make a sound because they've taken the mirror out. So there's no viewfinder. Not a problem. Astronauts with the right stuff can take photographs without viewfinders. They can press shutter buttons with armored gauntlets, which they can't see. The dial here tells you it's about 1 centimetre in diameter, which you can't see from inside a spacesuit either. So with all those limitations of use, as I say, the only automatic feature is the electric drive, and these are the batteries that drove the motor and advanced the film. Not one failure. Not one failure. I've been filmed for a few programs, and they had one of the cameras. Hasselblad UK have a replica. This is what it looks like from on top. There's the exposure meter. It's a little diagram. So if you've got the sun behind you, you set the shutter speed at 250th, and you set the aperture at 8, 5.6 or whatever. That's what you have to set. That's the aperture and shutter speed ring. And you've got to focus it by hand as well. It's not an automatic camera, and it's a film camera. Remember film? Here's a piece of film. That's a photographic film. That's what they used. A bit bigger than that, but that's photographic film. So don't think it's a digital camera. It's not a digital camera. It is a photographic film camera. And there's some important points about that, which we'll come to in just a minute. If you're going to go to the moon, you've got to practice a bit. So you've got to set up your simulation exercises. There's a model of the moon. It's about 20 foot in diameter. And these are some close-ups. That's the Sea of Tranquility. And that's a camera track. You put a camera at one end, move it towards the other. It looks like you're approaching the moon. That's then projected outside the simulator. This is how aircraft pilots are trained today. If you're going to train landing at Heathrow, you get films all around you showing what it's like to approach Heathrow. Yeah, they're films. They're very good ones. And they had big pieces of kit. This still exists. This is outside Langley in Virginia. Who else works in Langley in Virginia? Yeah, the clowns in America. Oh, bloody load of idiots. Sorry, I will not get political, sorry. That's still there. You can get 400 foot long, and it's 200 foot high, and it was to train the lander, and it was to remove 5/6 of its weight as if to simulate 1/6 gravity. Good idea. Right, here's the rocket. Saturn V rocket, big thing. Height of St. Paul's Cathedral, weighs 6 million pounds. Had £7.5 million of thrust. It's a big piece of kit, and it works so well because we saw it take off, didn't we? There it goes, clears the tower, takes off, and the next piece of information we get is when it lands, 8 days into case of Apollo 11, 8 days later. Splashdown. Between those two events, takeoff and landing, we have one source of information, NASA. There's no other independently verifiable information, even now, available. And I know people are going to start talking about photographs of the landers on the moon, but we'll come to that. If NASA stands for never a straight answer, or no astronaut sent anywhere, I tend not to believe what they tell me unless I can confirm it and check it out and verify it. And this is what I've been trying to do for the last 25 years. Check it out and verify that what they have told us. They built the Saturn V rockets, then to survive the heat, radiation and vacuum, spacesuits and spacecraft are needed. We're very delicate little creatures, us humans. We don't like vacuums. We don't like space. We have to be protected. And if we're going to come back, we need a heat shield. We'll come to why that's very important later. Now, in space, above about 75 miles, space is a vacuum. There's very little there. It's not a total vacuum because bits of the atmosphere float off. A few molecules float. But when you get to the moon, very little exists there. So on the moon, it's a total vacuum. Now, vacuum, most people understand pounds per square inch. Atmospheric pressure, this stuff here, 14.8 pounds per square inch of atmospheric pressure is pressing in us all the time. On the moon, it's minus. The actual figure, it's measured in what's called torr, T-O-R-R, named after an Italian scientist who devised the system. Because it is such a small amount of pressure, the torr level, atmospheric pressure is 760 torr. Just think of it as a unit of measure, torr. At sea level, it would be zero. Not at 0 pound per square inch, it would be 0 torr. On the moon, it's 10 to the minus 7. That's 0.000001. Very little. Now, what happens to photographic film, this stuff, when it experiences that level of vacuum? It disintegrates. Technically, it's called outgassing. The volatile elements of the film. The photographic film is an emulsion which started life as a liquid. It's coated onto a plastic backing. It's light sensitive, so when you've taken your picture, you can develop it. But in the vacuum of space, photographic film disintegrates. How do we know this? 2 craft were designed, one to go to the moon and one to go to photograph Earth. The one that went to the moon was called the Lunar Orbiter, not to be confused with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. Lunar Orbiter was sent to the moon in 1966 to photograph special landing sites that had no rocks or craters where Apollo landers could go. That was what was there were 5 of them. They orbited the moon, photographing the surface in considerable detail, down to about 2 foot not per pixel, because that comes later. Anyway, they could photograph in considerable detail from a height of about 30 miles as it orbited the moon. And it photographed it using photographic film, which was developed on board the spacecraft using a type of Polaroid system where film could be processed in situ. But in order to ensure the integrity of the film, they had to pressurize the container in which the camera and the film were contained to 1.5 pound per square inch. Or another way of putting it is 0.1 bar. Below that, the film disintegrates. The Hexagon spy satellite, launched in 1969 to 1971, used the same photographic equipment. And that was also pressurized. to £1.5 per square inch. How do I know this? Because the guy who designed the camera gave a talk at the lovely old British Interplanetary Society, and I asked him that question, because he said, the film disintegrated. I said, will that apply to Apollo? Yes, he said, it does. That's the House magazine. You won't see it in here, by the way, because they don't like the questions I ask. I tend to embarrass them a little bit. But the camera equipment using photographic film, not digital, it's what's so important to differentiate the two, disintegrates in space. So were the Hasselblad cameras pressurized? No, they were not. Therefore, the photographs allegedly taken on the lunar surface by the named astronauts, all 5,771 of the pictures, could not have been taken on the lunar surface. If anybody disagrees with that, because they've seen them published all over the place in magazines, we've got them all here. They're publishing all these photographs, but they don't explain about the problems. Telegraph magazine managed to do it as well. So if the photographs couldn't have been taken on the moon because the cameras wouldn't work, the film wouldn't work, where were they taken? Well, here on Earth, obviously, at the training and simulation exercises. Not a problem. Right, we're going off to the moon, so we've got to get through the radiation belts. Here they are. Quite pretty. Now, NASA have been asked about these famous radiation belts for so often that they've now come up with a special reason as to why they did not affect the astronauts. Because, get this, just so we know where we are, there's Florida, about there. When they launched, all the Apollo craft went due east across the Atlantic, subsequently across Africa, and more or less on an equatorial orbit around Earth. No, NASA now say, they didn't go on an equatorial orbit. They went on a polar orbit where they could avoid the belts. Wow, it took them 40 odd years to work that one out. That's what they say now. If you ask them, how do you get around the radiation belts? We avoided them by going on a polar. You can't go on a polar orbit launching from Florida across the Atlantic. You can't just turn left in your spacecraft. It doesn't work that way. You have to launch in the direction you want the orbit to go in. Of course, you can do a polar orbit. Spy satellites go into polar orbits. And they usually launch from Edwards Air Force Base on the Californian coast. But Apollo didn't. Apollo was launched across the Atlantic. Elon Musk has managed to find one of the Apollo 11 engines, and he's salvaged it. It's on display in Seattle. But they can't reverse engineer it. Oh no. Okay, let's get to the moon. Here we go. Lovely picture. There's Earth. We know it's Earth because it's blue. And this isn't. So that must be the moon. That must be Earth. Wonderful, isn't it? That was the photograph that started the whole environmental movement, because we have this fragile blue marble floating in the velvet blackness of space. We must protect our planet. It's a pity we keep bombing people. This is the craft in which they landed. This is the interior of the Apollo 11. Look at the hand controls. This is what Armstrong took over control of the craft using. The throttle controls and the little dials here and the switches here, buttons there, and in the middle here, we'll see it in a minute, there's a computer pad. Between them, a disky keypad. It's a 10-numbered keypad into which they could put in commands. And this is the famous computer that didn't need a memory. It could do everything by magic. And here are our heroes. This is Armstrong, this is Aldrin. And if you've heard the descent onto the lunar surface, you'll hear Aldrin's voice. And Armstrong is manually controlling this. Is he wearing a spacesuit? Well, of course he is. You can hear him. There's a 10,000-pound thrust rocket just below him. And 10,000-pound thrust rockets tend to make a bit of a racket. Well, not in space, I hear you say. No, not in space. But if he was not wearing his spacesuit, this would have been pressurized with an atmosphere, in which case you would have heard him. But you didn't hear him, so he was wearing a spacesuit and controlling a computer keyboard with heavy-duty gardening gloves when his life depended on it. Would you operate a computer keyboard with heavy-duty gardening gloves if your life depended on it? Probably not. But they had the right stuff, so they could. Now we have Dear Buzz. You know why he's called Buzz? Because his sister, when he was young, couldn't pronounce the word brother. She called him Buzz. And it stuck, and that's why it's called Buzz Lightyear today. It's named after him. It's wonderful, isn't it? Right, he's getting out of the lander. They've just gone onto the moon. Notice where the sun is. The sun is the other side. That is the directly illuminated surface of the moon there. And here he is coming out, and Neil Armstrong, who's taking the pictures, got bored, decided to take a photograph of the rubbish bag and the engine, because obviously you have to see if it was damaged when they landed it. They're quite what they'd have done if it had been damaged, nobody knows. It's not in the manual. But anyway, photograph the rubbish bag, and oh, the leg, yes, make sure that's not bent. And you'll notice that there's no dust at all anywhere in it. Oh, he's coming down a bit more. This is a photograph taken here on Earth under controlled studio lighting conditions. Now, I've been saying that for 25 years and nobody has contradicted me. Because they can't. It's not possible to say that that was taken on the moon. We know the film won't record it because that will destroy it. This is in shadow. You can see the directly illuminated, so we'll go on one more and that will show where the shadows of the lander are. So this is directly illuminated surface by the sun, I presume. It may not be, but we'll assume it's the sun for the moment. And it's not overexposed. He is in total darkness here, but he's lit up like a Christmas tree. Where's all that light coming from? We'll just go back. No, sorry, go back. Go to this one. Okay. Notice his right foot is not on the rung, so his body is moving relative to the camera. His left foot is stuck out at a ridiculously stupid angle. If you've ever been mountaineering or rock climbing, there's one thing you're always told: 3 points of contact at all times. 2 hands, 1 leg, 2 legs, 1 hand. Because if you don't have 3 points of contact and you fall, you won't have enough to save you. So 3 points of contact. He's got 2. His foot is not on the rung. He can't see from inside his spacesuit where the rung is. He's got his left foot out here, so if his right foot didn't hit the rung, what's he going to do? He's going to fall from about 10 foot high. If he's on the moon, he's dead. But he's not on the moon. He's done it 100 times in the simulation exercise. And he's now fooling around as if to say, look, I can muck around up here as good as the next guy. We don't actually know if it's Buzz Aldrin. It may be. It could be some actor somewhere. But look how this is not overexposed. This is in shadow, but it's lit up. Oh, it's Earthshine. Where's the Earth? It's more or less directly overhead at this point, assuming they're on the moon. Oh, it's the special reflective property of the lunar surface that is composed of all these little beads of glass that are created by the impact of meteors on the lunar surface. It's a wonderful story. It's complete nonsense because the lunar surface has the reflectivity of tarmac, that stuff out there. 8% of the light hitting it is reflected. So 8% of the light here is sufficient to be recorded on Kodak Ektachrome film, which was the film that was being used, and not overexpose the directly illuminated surface. If you've ever used a film camera, you'll know you have to get the exposure right, or you wreck the film. But on Apollo, they got the right stuff, and they don't wreck anything. He's standing in the pad. Sorry. He's standing in the pad here, and there are highlights of light on his boots. Oh, they just got them out of the wrapper, so it's a very shiny surface. These are the sort of ridiculous excuses that NASA come up with. No, there's lights. There's a light source illuminating him. Probably a flash gun. That's why you don't see him moving. in a studio here on Earth. Those are the 8 pictures we just looked at in sequence. They were taken, they're consecutive pictures, they were taken over a period of 3 minutes. Now, it's not difficult to take 3 minutes, to take 8 pictures in 3 minutes. That's not what I'm saying. But if you haven't got a viewfinder and you have to focus and adjust your shutter and your aperture and focus pictures, because these are 3 different scenes, there, another different scene there, this is a completely different scene, where you have to adjust the shutter for directly illuminated surface, and then back here you have to adjust it again. You've got no viewfinder, you've got heavy duty gardening gloves, and you've got to do it all with your hand and press the shutter that you can't see. And we're asked to believe that this is taken by the named astronauts on the lunar surface. That's the sequence there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'll come to that's what you can go onto there's 4 websites where they have all these pictures showing in sequence. I happen to use the Lunar and Planetary Institute website because I just prefer the way they put it up. But there are many others, they're each numbered individually. Apollo Saturn 11, Magazine 40, and then the picture number. I don't know if it is Apollo Simulation or Apollo Saturn. Here's another ridiculous photograph. How do you take this picture? You've got the camera mounted on your chest. How far do you have to lean forward so that you can get the footprint or your boot in shot and in focus, and you haven't got a viewfinder? No, it's professionally taken. If you look at it in detail, we can't see it on these images, but the focusing is absolutely spot on. No viewfinder. Oh, here we go. They had a Dyson on board, obviously, because they hoovered the pads and got all the stuff that was from the moon off the bits that arrived from Earth. There's no dust here. There should be. The explanation, of course, the debunking of that statement is that because it's a vacuum on the moon, the rocket exhaust would blow straight away. It wouldn't disturb the dust. Of course it disturbed the dust. And it wouldn't settle anywhere. This is the only photograph of Neil Armstrong on the lunar surface. Have you seen another one? It's the only one. It's part of a panoramic series taken by Buzz Aldrin. It's his back view. It's as if he was ashamed to be photographed in this ridiculous situation that he found himself. Have a look at the US flag here in relation to the horizon. Now look at the US flag here in relation to the horizon. It's a completely different position. That is taken from quite a high camera position. The next one is taken from a relatively low camera position, probably chest height. But they were only supposed to use the cameras on their chest. Notice this is Buzz Aldrin, he didn't have a camera. There's an interesting little thing here. Have a look at the one-legged astronaut. 1 foot, 1 footprint. There's none in front of it, there's none behind it. Is he hopping? What's he doing? I don't know. We weren't told there was a one-legged astronaut on the lunar surface. Here are 2 astronauts on the lunar surface at the same time. That's okay, it's taken from a film. The data acquisition camera, it's called. It was a movie camera that was set to film at 1 frame per second the whole time they were on the lunar surface. So you've got 2 astronauts of the same height on the lunar surface, flat surface. Why is one shadow 50% longer than the other? I don't know. It's an anomaly. It shouldn't be that way. So, US flag, fair enough. The US have got there. They plant their flag. Once they planted the flag, which had happened early on in the mission, they did not touch it again. They didn't go anywhere near it. They saluted it. Fair enough. And you can see that it's fairly clearly stated here that it's facing more or less directly into the sun, assuming it's the sun, because the shadow is relatively narrow. So what's it doing here? At right angles. Nobody touched it. There's no wind on the moon, as we keep being told. And this is from the film, the data acquisition camera. And when you start looking in detail at that, you look at the date at the top of that technical chart taken from that film. That wasn't the day they were landing on the moon. That's a week before. What's going on? The photographer is a chap called Gynes. He did work for NASA. So did an inspector called Jones. These are the technical details about the particular film. They're so sloppy at NASA that when they posted this onto YouTube, and film from all missions are on YouTube, they forgot to take the date off when they did the simulation. This is the same date, but a different magazine. Put them together. Camera serial number, it's the same. Magazine serial number is different. Lens serial number is the same. Exposure is the same. Same people involved. They thought we wouldn't notice. Like they never thought she could lose in relation to Hillary Clinton. Again, camera at different weird height here. You're looking down on the astronaut. You've got some pretty strange stuff going on here. We're told it's lens flare. Hasselblad lenses don't flare like that. There is a lens flare here, and it's a hexagonal shape which reflects the lens shape in a Hasselblad camera. Famous photograph, man on the moon. This is the photograph. When I started looking at this is all I could find. I had to go and get a set of postcards at an astronomy show in London. This was one of the ones I got. It's been altered, because that is the original. You'll notice that there is very little black at the top. So to make a pretty picture, you add a bit of black at the top. That's the one I just shown you. It balances it better. It's a better PR image. But it's not the actual photograph that they took. That's the actual photograph they took. There are also other details here. Where's all this light coming from? Illuminating the shadow side of his spacesuit, which should be virtually black. On the moon, there is no atmosphere, there are no clouds, so it would be very bright or very dark. But it's not. It's beautifully illuminated. It's a great image. And here's yet another ridiculous photograph taken on Apollo 11. We don't know which astronaut took it, but there's the lander. There's Earth. We know Earth is at least 60 degrees above the horizon. It's quite high up. So how did they take it? How did they take that picture? By leaning over so far backwards, they'd fall over. It's ridiculous, and we're expected to believe this. It's when you start looking at these anomalies, these details, the unexplained details, because NASA will not address these. They'll say, oh, there are no stars in the photographs because the cameras couldn't record them. Of course they couldn't. I've never ever said there should be stars in them. Oh, the flags are not moving, they're not waving, there's no wind on them. Of course there's no wind on the moon. NASA aren't that stupid. But that's what they continually come up with, and it's all been debunked. So why is our heroes here, Armstrong, Aldrin, it's the highlight of light in Armstrong's eyes. Now that is an artifact of a flash gun on the camera. Look at any paparazzi photograph and you will see a highlight of light in both eyes. It's an artifact of having a flash gun on the camera. This was taken during the simulation exercises here on Earth by a professional photographer recording the event. But the description for this is that it was taken in the lunar module after his moonwalk. It's a lie, and that's published in... That's why I put the photographs like that, because that was Neil Armstrong inside the lunar module as it rested on the lunar surface. No, he wasn't. He was at the simulation rig in Houston. Ditto Aldrin. Why are they lying all the time? Because they have to fabricate something that didn't happen. Now, moving on to Apollo 12, is Al Bean coming down the ladder. And he said when he got to the bottom, it may have been a small step for Neil, but it's a giant leap for me. I think he was trying to be funny. But the retouching is so bad that you can see, it doesn't show up very clear here, but this has been blacked out. The original was much lighter. It's been blacked out, i.e. it's been faked. There's another sequence of 8 photographs taken on Apollo 12. This is Al Bean. He's the guy who didn't know if he'd been through the Van Allen radiation belts when interviewed by Bart Sibrel. Oh, he said, oh, well, and when he was told that they were 1,000 miles above the Earth's surface, he said, oh, well, we must have been through them, but we didn't notice anything. 8 photographs in sequence. Same photographer, same subject. Why is the horizon so different? Sorry. Why is the horizon on one image here through his chest and the other image here rather artfully through his visor? That's the photograph you'll see quite often. It's a clever photograph, I'll give them that. But it's not real, it wasn't taken on the moon. Here is a camera that is attached to his chest, taken by another camera attached to the other Pete Conrad's chest. You should be looking straight into the camera lens. You're not. You're looking down on it. Because it was taken by a photographer up here. It's not rocket science, It's not rocket science to identify these problems. It's just that people don't want to accept that they have been fooled. As Mark Twain said, it is easier to fool somebody than persuade them that they have been fooled. You're looking straight into the camera here, but you're not here. And what's all this going on in the background? I know, it's E.T. come along and say, well, who the hell are these people? Who gave them permission to land? Get off! Take your rocks, take your flag, go. Don't come back. We obeyed them, we haven't been back. That's just showing the crosshairs on the film are in the wrong place up here. It's a bit technical. They shouldn't be as close together as that, but they are. And here's strange shadow angles. There's the photographer with the sun behind him, so what's the shadow of the Surveyor unmanned craft landed a couple of years earlier? What's it doing going in a completely different direction? And then you got this ridiculous picture here. This is from Apollo 17. There's an astronaut, doesn't matter who it is. But what's this shadow doing going at that angle compared to this angle? You get the sun, it doesn't work that way.
And the shadow on the rock on the left, the shadow's going the opposite way.
Yep. Sorry. Hang on. Yeah. The shadows here. It's a weird picture, that one. Can anybody explain it? The shadows there are quite different. The shadow, it shouldn't be like that. It really shouldn't. If you go on a sunny day, stand with your back to the sun, stick a rock on that side, a rock on that side, the shadows will converge. I'll give them that. They will converge. Shadows do. It's to do with the perspective of the lens of a single viewpoint camera. We have stereoscopic vision because we have 2 eyes. So we automatically adjust for that sort of offset. But cameras don't have stereoscopic vision. They have monoscopic. They have one viewpoint. This would show a completely highly illuminated surface of the Apollo 14 craft when the sun is, you can see where the sun is, behind it. Oh, come on. That's just not the way photographs work. Now, let's have a look here. This is Apollo 14 again. Look where the flag is. I'm going to switch it over like that. So we've still got the flag there. And this is the photograph of the same scene. Who took it? There's 2 astronauts on the lunar surface. Only ever 2 astronauts on the lunar. Who took the photograph? They didn't have a timer on the camera, didn't have a tripod to put it on. It's a montage. It's assembled out of 5 different images. Notice the flag has gone over. It's the golf shot from Alan Shepard's biography called Moonshot, alluding to the fact that he had a golf club and hit a golf ball. Have you ever seen a golf ball in motion across the screen? You'll see it coming towards you. You won't see it going across the screen. It goes too fast. But they got the photograph all wrong. It is a photograph. There are crosshairs. There's one there. And NASA had it on display in the Kennedy Space Center at about this size. Very proud of it they were, because Alan Shepard's quite a senior astronaut. And we raised the query. We said, please could you explain, Mr. NASA, where you got the parts of this photograph? Because we know it's a composite. They took it down. It hasn't been seen since. That's the video image of the same picture. It's what they tried to copy, not very well, because they even got the flag round the wrong way. Moving on to Apollo 15, this is the landing site, Mount Hadley. Mount Hadley there, Mount Hadley Delta. Mount Hadley Delta is about 13,000 foot high. There it is, 13,000 foot high. Does it look it? No, of course it doesn't. An equivalent here on Earth would be Mount Everest and Everest Base Camp. The difference in height between Everest Base Camp and Everest is about 10,000 feet. It's about 7 miles away. It's the same type of distance away as Mount Hadley Delta was on the moon. That's what you expect to see. You see detail in everything, but not on the moon. It's a little hill. It's not 13,000 foot high. And it's a very nice picture. In professional terms, it's called a pack shot. It's an advertising pack shot where your eye goes to the astronaut, is led through the scene, they overlap, it's led through the scene at the other side. So you can read the picture. You see the flag, oh yeah, lander, oh yeah, a rover, oh yes. You don't need a caption. It's a very good picture. But it wasn't a one-off snap by Dave Scott. So, these are consecutive images. I've double-checked those numbers. They're consecutive images. This is Dave Scott, photographed by Jim Irwin. Where's his camera? This is Jim Irwin, photographed by Dave Scott. There's only one camera between them, and they didn't hand it to each other. There's no record of them handing each other. Anyway, it might even fall off and it would get dust all over it. And they're in virtually the same position. It's a big mystery, that one. Where's the flag? Flag was always one of the first things to be put on the lunar surface. There it is. There's the flag. So where is it here? Gone. Memo to set dresser. Remember flag. Because that's all it can be. The set dresser got it wrong. There's a bit technical detail here. It's to do with where the lunar rover, oh, the bloody lunar rover. That's a model, by the way. It's not a real thing. It's not £6 million worth of car made by Boeing and General Motors, which is what we're told. These are models, as is that. Start looking at the perspective of it. You'll see that the perspective is very slightly different from what you would expect to see if this was a real-size object. These are mannequins. If you see the lunar rover in action, it's a radio-controlled model. Now, one of the objections to some of what I'm saying will be, well, surely the Russians would have blown the whistle if they'd suspected that this was being faked. Yes, that's a reasonable statement to make. But the Russians only had as much access to the information as you and I did at the time. I'm old enough to have been around when this was supposed to be happening. Because NASA made it public. They were going to show live television from the moon. Live television from the moon? Are you insane? How do you do that? What power of transmission is required to transmit a television picture 240,000 miles through the Earth's atmosphere? What power is required? The amount of power they had available was 3 kilowatts. That's it. Total was 4 kilowatts, but they had to run the rest of the spacecraft on the rest of it. So 4 kilowatts was total power available on the lunar lander. But they transmitted a live television picture from the moon. No, they didn't. They wouldn't have had enough power. Anyway, there's the lunar rover. This is a reasonable facsimile of the lunar surface. There is a film made, it's called Smoke and Mirrors, It's 2 hours 44 minutes, and it recounts how the whole Apollo photographic record was created by probably the man who did it. The trouble is, the man who did it narrates the film, and you can't hear what he's saying because he's disguising his voice. He doesn't want to be identified. Somebody has taken that film, Smoke and Mirrors. It's called MB Enhanced, and it records, it subtitles the narration. If you go onto YouTube, you won't find it. It's been removed because it identifies how the whole thing was done. People have archived the film. There are websites you can go to see it. It's worth going on to. The guy who wrote this book, The Apollo Moon Hoax, how did they do it? Discusses it in there. This book was published 4 days ago. It's on Amazon. Trevor Weaver is the author's name. And this one, The Apollo Moon Missions, Hiding a Hoax in Plain Sight. Randy Walsh, he's a pilot, so he knows about navigation over distance. NASA is now being exposed in some detail. Anyway, back to the rover. This is a model. On our list, I'll show you these pictures at the websites at the end. If you go onto that, there's a very interesting and technical article written by a Russian filmmaker describing how it was done in using models. Because he used models. Hollywood uses models. If you've ever seen the film Back to the Future, they're models. They're not real cars. Some were real cars. Most of the action shots are models. This is Apollo 17. That's where they landed here. There's the Lunar command module. Right, this is a question for the astronomers present. This is Apollo 11. This is the landing site. That's a shadow of one of the reaction control rockets on the lander. It's not a shadow. That's the terminator, the difference between light and dark. So on Apollo 11, we get a terminator. On Apollo 17, we don't get a terminator. Why not? The moon is the same size on Apollo 17 as it is on Apollo 11. The sun angle is about the same. Shadow lengths indicate where the sun angle is. Why is there no terminator? Because they forgot. They were filming it from a model. And here's a double exposure. Right, here's Harrison Smith on Apollo 17. This is the Apollo 17 flag. And there's Earth. So they must be on the moon. Right, you've got no viewfinder on your camera. You've got a shutter button you can't see from inside your spacesuit. How do you line up your mate, your flag, and get it pointing straight at Earth? Once. The second image here is to show that it's actually a double image. Not a double exposure, that's a different thing altogether, it's a double image. The double exposure would be to take the same photograph twice with different parts of it. A double image is when you put in an additional image to the photograph, in other words, the Earth. I can't show it on here, but that Earth is actually inserted into the image. In that photograph is the Apollo 17 lunar lander. Where is it? There's the rover. It is there. Before we find it, let's just have a look at what happens when you enhance the image. You start to get some pretty weird stuff going on in the background. Stanley Kubrick did not direct anything to do with Apollo, despite many people claiming that he did. He didn't have the time. He was finishing off his masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey. But an interesting side is that Stanley Kubrick's next film but one, Eyes Wide Shut, because he had so much control over filming, he could dictate when the premiere of any of his films was to be held. He dictated in his contract that the premiere of Eyes Wide Shut would be held on the 16th of July, 1999, the 30th anniversary of the launch of Apollo 11. It's as if he's playing with us, because I think the person who had more to do with the creation of Apollo was Stanley Kubrick's special effects director, Douglas Trumbull, who's actually still alive. Or maybe also including John Dykstra, who did the special effects on Star Wars. Anyway, let's find the Apollo lander. Here it is, same picture, slightly different image. So where is the Apollo 17 lunar lander? It's about 3 or 4 miles away from the camera position. It's there. You need to enlarge it considerably to see that it actually is the lunar lander. So if it's doing it, if it's that far away, which it would be, I mean that's what a photograph taken of an object 4 miles away would look like. What on earth is it doing over here? What's it doing here? Features A, and A are the same in each image. D is the same in each image. This middle one is the one we just looked at. These are other images showing the same feature, Perspective doesn't work that way. Why is that object the sat size and the lunar lander in that one is much bigger? Over here you've got to really enlarge it, because they got the scale wrong on the models, like they did here. There's the lunar lander. What's it doing over here? It didn't move once it had landed, we're told. Those are the same features, B, D, and E. The lunar crater. It wasn't on wheels, this lander. It landed, bang, that's where it was. Looking at the same lander, here it is over here. There's the lander. It's not there. It should be over here, but it's not. It's gone. And we have the magic rover. Here we go. No wheel prints. Lots of footprints, no wheel prints. How did it get there? Well, if it's a model, which it is, it wouldn't necessarily make any wheel prints. It would be quite light. But you can make boot prints quite easily. And here we have the fender repair. Okay, here we are. There's my roll of duct tape, gaffer tape, call it what you like. That's what they repaired the lunar rover mudguard with an old map. It obviously landed where they were supposed to land, so they used the gaffer tape. There's one problem with that. NASA now state that gaffer tape, duct tape, does not work in space. And the reason it doesn't work is very simple. It's got an adhesive. That's what it's about. Gaffer tape is an adhesive. It sticks to things. Adhesive is a liquid. In the vacuum of space, I can't get it undone. In the vacuum of space, the liquid would disappear. So that wouldn't work, it would fall off. So yet another ridiculous idea from NASA. The rover tracks, they seem to change. On the same roll of film, we have them here as herringbone pattern. A few images earlier, we have them as straight. They only had one rover on the lunar surface. Oh dear, now we've got to get off the moon. Top half of the lander here is going to leap up as if on a bungee rope, and it's going to fire its 4,500 pound thrust rocket to get it up there. Where did the exhaust go? The rocket is under here. That is not a hole. That is just to fit the exhaust channel in. There's nowhere for the exhaust to go. You can't fire a rocket and have nowhere for the exhaust to go without frying the astronauts in the ascent stage. And anyway, it should show up in space. That's what the space shuttle looks like. And that uses the same fuel as was used in the ascent stage of the lunar module. Sorry, NASA, you got it completely wrong. You can't even get your facts correct on the descent stage. All right, let's get back to Earth. This is probably going to be the only picture you'll see of Earth. You can always tell it's got a little triangle of cloud over the Sudan. There's Saudi Arabia, it's North Africa, Madagascar down here, Antarctica down here. The bit that's melting, by the way. Back then it was not melting, it still isn't melting. Anyway, most of the other pictures you'll see are composites, they're CGI. NASA admit to this. They have a special department that creates new images of the Earth, because their satellites don't go far enough out to get one image. This is the only one I've ever found which is a photograph of the whole Earth. I don't know how they got it. If you're coming back from the moon, the command module re-enters Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour. Is 25,000 miles an hour fast? Yes, it's very fast indeed. But spacecraft don't have brakes. So it's got to slow down by using the frictional load from the atmosphere on a heat shield, which is made of ablative material, which basically means that it destroys itself. We'll come back to that in just a minute because there's an interesting comparison. That is the speed a spacecraft re-enters from lunar orbit. It's much faster than the shuttle would enter from the space station. So what are the objections to all this? The Russians would have blown the whistle. We've covered that. The rocks. Oh dear, the rocks. You've all seen the rock, haven't you? I haven't got it. Somebody's got it. Oh yeah, here, moon rock. Here we go, moon rock. It's rolled like that one there. It's not that one there. Could be one of these. Anyway, piece of moon rock. How do you know it's a piece of moon rock? Because I say so. You can go into the Science Museum and see a piece of moon rock. How do you know it's a piece of moon rock? It says so. Moon rock. They wouldn't lie, would they? What you're looking at in the Science Museum is not this, something like this. That's what I call a piece of moon rock. What you see in the Science Museum, and to any other museum that has a piece of alleged moon rock, is you see a few grains of dust encapsulated in plastic. You don't see a piece of moon rock. You don't see this sort of thing. Because NASA has still got them all. And they've sent them out to all these laboratories and universities around the world. And guess what? There is no difference between the rocks that have been examined here and equivalent rocks found on Earth. No difference at all. Isotope ratio is the same. It's extraordinary. And they claim it came from the moon. Then it's the reflectors that obviously they took into the moon on Apollo 11, 12 and 15, I think it was. And there were 3 of them. What's called retroreflectors, similar to road signs. You know, if you're going along at night, your headlights hit a road sign, it's quite bright because it's got retroreflectors, i.e. it reflects the light back to where it came from. This is about 18 inches square, half a square metre. And it was placed on the lunar surface, you see, lunar surface, placed on the lunar surface. You could fire a laser at it. And you can measure how far away the moon is, apparently. It's got quite a powerful laser. It's perfectly possible to fire a laser at the moon. But when you fire a laser at the moon, most people would assume, reasonably enough, that the laser beam is parallel the whole way to the moon. No, it's not. It diverges very slightly. So by the time a laser beam 1 centimetre diameter from Earth reaches the moon, it's about 2 kilometres in diameter. So what diameter will it be when it gets back to Earth? 20 kilometres. So you're not going to be able to get much light in that. And it really doesn't matter about reflectors on the moon, because 7 years before Apollo, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology were doing exactly that, firing lasers at the moon with no mirrors. The Crimea Astrophysical Laboratory in Russia were doing exactly the same thing the following year, getting a signal back, get a big enough dish, you can receive it. You don't need a mirror on the moon. How do they know where it was? They don't. And if you fired a laser at that thing, what amount of the light, assuming it's 2 kilometres in diameter, how much light would that actually reflect? Well, you can do the maths. You do pi r squared is the formula for the area of a circle, 2 kilometres. It's about 30 million square metres. And that's about 1/6 of. So it's such a small amount of light that it wouldn't be detectable as a separate amount of light, despite the Mythbusters' false images, if you've seen the Mythbusters show where they're trying to deconstruct all this, they fake it themselves. They wear white coats to make the photographs look better. So this is the other reason that the Russians didn't blow the whistle. They didn't need to. They weren't really concerned with somebody capering around on the lunar surface. They knew it wasn't possible. That's why they didn't launch any Russians. They couldn't get them through the radiation. Red gas. If you're in Europe today, you will use Russian natural gas to heat your factories, your homes. Like 30% of European natural gas comes from Russia. Huge fields in Siberia. When was the first contract for the supply of Russian natural gas into Western Europe signed? September 1968, between West Germany, as it was then, Austria and Italy. It's called gas for pipes. That was the deal. Russia would supply the gas. West Germany would build the pipes, 2,000 kilometers of pipes, 4 foot in diameter. They had the infrastructure to do it. So Russia weren't going to make a fuss about it. They couldn't care less, to be honest. This is what's causing all the fuss today. It's called Nord Stream 2. It's the second pipeline under the Baltic coming out of St. Petersburg into northern Germany, spreading out there through the distribution centres. Some of it comes to Britain, not much. We get most of ours from Norway. But it's caused a lot of problems. One of the things that President Trump said, well, why are we protecting Germany when they're getting all their gas from Russia? Come on, pay us some money. It's the art of the deal. Okay, moon rock. I love this one. The Rijksmuseum in Holland, Holland's National Museum, had a display of space memorabilia, one of which was a piece of moon rock, presented with the compliments of the Ambassador of the United States of America, J. William Middeldorf II, to commemorate the visit to the Netherlands of the Apollo 11 astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin. So that's pretty legitimate, isn't it? It sort of tells you what you're looking at. You're looking at a piece of moon rock from the United States to commemorate the visit of the Apollo 11 astronauts. The trouble is, it's rather fake. Despite the amused reporting that was going on, the reason it's fake, the story is fake, is because this was discovered to be a piece of petrified wood. When geologists examined it after the Rijksmuseum took the exhibits down, geologists said, could we have a look at the piece of moon rock, please? And they said, yeah, go ahead. Piece of petrified wood. It is known that no Apollo 11 astronaut presented any country or any politician of any country with a piece of moon rock. They presented them with a photograph, a signed photograph. This was discovered in the late Prime Minister of Holland's effects when he died. The card is separate from it. The family, bless them, decided it would be better off on display in the National Museum. They presented the card and the rock to the Rijksmuseum, who made the not altogether reasonable assumption that the two went together without any investigation. But it's now demonstrated that this was not referring to that rock. But it makes a wonderful story, and NASA have no explanation as to why. But NASA have explanations as to what this is. You can tell they do because they put such a whacking great arrow on it that you know exactly what you're looking at. Apollo 11, 15, 16, 17, 14. Big arrow pointing to something. We're meant to assume that these are the lunar landers. How do we know? NASA tells us. Never a straight answer. So when they get to Apollo 12 here, Apollo Lunar Surface Experimental Package, Intrepid is the name of the descent stage of the lunar. Look how big it is. Look how big, it's huge, isn't it? You can really see a lot of detail in that. That's the Surveyor 3, that was the one we saw a picture of earlier with a strange angle. That's the crater name, another crater, crater, crater. And this would point to the astronauts' footprints on the lunar surface. So because you can see astronauts' footprints on the lunar surface, you assume you're looking at artifacts left there by astronauts on the Apollo missions. No, you're not. You're looking at photoshopped images. Why is it in black and white? This is taken in 2009. We're told that the camera that was used, the telephoto lens on that camera, could identify an object of 0.41 meters, a pixel of 0.41 meters. That is the same resolution as the camera that took this photograph. It's the London Eye, where you can see individual cars on the London Eye. You can see cars parked in the car park here, and in greater detail you can see some cars even have sunroofs, so you know which way they're pointing. You can see individual people on the pavements here. This photograph was taken by an orbiting satellite called GeoEye-1, orbiting 460 miles above the Earth's surface, photographing through the dust and pollution of the atmosphere. This photograph was taken 12 miles above the lunar surface through the vacuum of space. And we're expected to believe that that's the best they can do. I really do not believe it. I'm not persuaded by it. I think that we are being misled by false images. These landers are about 20 foot across. They're the height of this room. That was about 6 foot high. Seems to be casting a very strange shaped shadow. It's a fake. In my view, that is a fake image with lots of lettering so that we're persuaded that, because we want to believe it. We all want to believe it. I want to believe it. I watch the damn things live at 3:30 in the morning in London. I want to believe it. But I want to believe the truth. I don't want to believe the fabrication. You know, check Google Maps for your own house and see if you can see the car outside it. Of course you can. Probably see it in 3 dimensions if you want to. This was taken by the Lunar Orbiter in 1966. This is Copernicus crater, slightly to the left of center if you look on the lunar surface. This is meteor crater here on Earth, and that's what happens when you fire a nuclear bomb off underground. You get a crater looking rather like that. This was taken by the Lunar Orbiter, 1966, and it basically shows an object moving across the lunar surface. There's another one here, it's not quite so clear, but there's an object at the end there. I don't know what they are, but when I heard about the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter had photographed the whole lunar surface again, I thought, well, it must, if that object is still there, it'll appear in the photograph, and it does. It's a different sun angle. I don't know what it is. I know what I think it might be. It's certainly not a rolling rock, which is NASA's explanation, because no rock rolling across the lunar surface will leave a track as wide as the rock itself. If you roll a beach ball across sand, it'll be, the diameter of the track will be about half the width of the ball. It's about 40 foot wide, that object, whatever it is. Anyway, so we're going to come back to Earth. Here's the re-entry. Now, this is what Apollo 14 command module looks like. Anybody spot anything rather anomalous here? Anything strange? Something that probably shouldn't be there?
It's not burnt. It's not burnt.
Yeah, it's not burnt. It's got handles all over it. These are aluminium handles. What temperature does aluminium melt at? 600 degrees centigrade. These are not put on there after it arrived back. There are photographs in flight of the Apollo command modules with aluminium handles. Why weren't they burnt off by the 5,000 degrees centigrade re-entry temperature? And why isn't it blackened? Why isn't it burnt as the Soyuz craft, when it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, is burnt? This is the Orion craft. This is Apollo 2.0. This was launched in December 2014, the best part of 5 years ago. On one flight, went 3,600 miles out to come back, so it was only returning to Earth at 80% of lunar orbit return speed. Why is the whole craft covered in heat shield? This is taken from the space shuttle. The Apollo craft doesn't have it. The Orion craft has it. The reason the Orion craft has not flown since December 2014 is because the heat shield, the main heat shield under here, virtually failed. So why don't they just take the same formula that was used on Apollo and put it on there? They lost the formula. It's called AFCOT 5061. That's what you can see in the Science Museum in London. Notice the handles on Apollo 10. No handles on Orion. Lots of heat shield. Now, another problem is that says compression pad. When you have your command module, this thing, it sits on top of the service module. So it has to be attached to the service module. How is it attached? With steel bolts that go through the heat shield. That's why they're called compression pads. When the two separate, explosive bolts separate them, something has to fill the gap that was left by those attachments. There are 6 of them around the craft. Otherwise you'll get the same effect as happened on the Columbia space shuttle that burnt up as the came through the Earth's atmosphere. But Orion didn't burn up because the compression pads obviously worked. But the heat shield didn't. And this is what the effect will be when you have to maintain this fabricated story. This was 3 weeks after their landing because they were put in quarantine. I guess they brought any lunar germs back with them. Seeing as they hadn't gone to the moon, it's hard to know how they could have brought it. So they had to sit in quarantine. And this is the sort of demeanour that these people who've been to the moon have. It's pathetic. I could feel sorry for them, but I won't, because they fabricated a story and maintained it. They deserve everything that's coming to them. So what's been learned from Apollo? Orbiting the moon with unmanned satellites, straightforward. Landing astronauts on the moon and returning them safely to the Earth, that's the hard part. It's the human aspect of it. And what was it all about? We just to occupy the high ground, low Earth orbit. That's what President Johnson said that the space program was all about. So I'm basically with astronaut 4 on this one, because that's who I think had a great deal to do with it. You recognise who he is, won't you? Mickey Mouse. Walt Disney. That's where it all came from. That's the website to go to read a lot about this. Or this one, Moonfaker, that's Jarrah White's website in Australia. He does a lot of filming, short films about it. He's prepared to take on all comers to argue the case for the faking of Apollo. But we do have to acknowledge NASA for putting the whole Apollo record online. They didn't know what they were letting themselves in for when they did it, but I thank them anyway. There are a lot of people writing books. I say there's several new books out now. Randy Walsh's book, Trevor Weaver's books. There's a lot of people doing it, so it's not going to go away, this story. I'm going to stand up, if people invite me. Thanks, Neil, for inviting me. I'll stand up and say, it's fake. We've been fooled. Let's not be fooled in future. Sorry, that was advertising. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found it of interest. Oh, moon rock, sorry.
I'll run the moon rock later.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much to Marcus. What we'll do, we'll take a break, so everyone can use the loo, get drinks and things like that. And then afterwards, maybe if you want to answer any questions that people might have. I know I've got to take Ben to the station by about 10:30, haven't I, Ben? So we'll be, you lot can still stay here, but I've got to get Ben back to the moon.
Okay. Through the Van Allen belts.
Through the Van Allen.
James has come through them.
Right.
Fast to the radiation.
It came from the north down the south, yeah.
Obviously, a car is a useful shield against it.
Okay, so we'll take a 15-minute break. If you can try and grab drinks as soon as you can, or use the loo. If you are using the loo, I'd suggest that gents anyway, try and use the loo up there. But if there is a problem, then come down and just be careful of the tripods and things.
Yeah.
So for the minute, thank you.
Okay,
Marcus.
thank you. And Can I just say, I want the really hard question. Don't pussyfoot around. Challenge me. Because I've yet to have a question that, and I'll say this,
Right, Q&A. Who's? Oh, goodness me, the hands are already up.
right,
So, okay, Andrew. I was just curious, Marcus, what made you first suspicious? I can't remember if I heard you speaking about how your initial suspicions were aroused about the whole Apollo hoax.
it was an American. His name was David Summers, speaking in Glastonbury, about something completely different. He was talking about megaliths, I think, or something like that. It could have been David Childers. And he happened to mention in passing, oh, there's Apollo photographs. They're all fake, you know. Well, this was 92. What's he on about? Now, I was trained as a photographer in London. I worked as a professional photographer for about 5 years. Great fun, not a lot of money. But I knew the camera. I used the Hasselblad camera. I knew the film that was used. Kodak Ektachrome film, very good film. So I thought, well, I'm going to have a look at the pictures. So I went out and got this set of postcards. That's all I could find. I mean, there were encyclopedias, but they were a bit expensive, so I thought, well, I'll get a set of postcards. I went to an astronomy show in London, got a set of postcards, and I said, oh, I can see what they're talking about. Because I knew enough to know how a photograph is created, and how you can read a photograph. You can tell what lens is used by the depth of field that appears in the picture. You know where the lights are coming from, you know if there's more than one light source, because you can see it in the picture. It's like reading a book. If you can read a photograph, it's easy to understand how it's created. And the more I looked at them, the more I realized, hey, these are fake, because they didn't have additional light sources. I had to find out a bit about Apollo at that point. So I got David Baker's book, the Encyclopedia of Space Travel, I think it was. Well, it was actually the actual book that Bill Casey used before, when he was writing his book, this 1976. It was the first book on the subject. And I got hold of that, and I got hold of Ralph Renee's book in 92, NASA Moon America. And then I knew David Percy and Mary Bennett. I knew what they were doing, and I was following their work. And I just got more and more involved, because the more I looked at it, the more I realized that the thing was fake. We've been fooled. Then you get into other areas, and then, you know, well, that's your day job, and the job is to investigate these things. I spent 25 years looking into conspiracies, if you want to call them that. So yeah, and that's why I stand here today and say Apollo is fake. Apollo has no validity. And this is why. And this idea about the film, the gaffer tape, and the moon rock, nobody's ever refuted that. It's all been debunked. No stars in the picture, flag, waving flag. That's all they ever talk about. Nobody's ever addressed the vacuum effect on a film. Nobody's ever addressed the ability to use a camera without a viewfinder wearing heavy-duty gardening gloves. They've never addressed it. So they're pretty fake debunkers along with it as well. So if any debunkers here, sorry, any debunkers, it's not meant to insult you personally, it's just meant to say, look, come on, let's up the game a bit. James.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, Marcus, in previous lectures, you've often mentioned that photographer, the order of the photographs doesn't seem natural to you. You said it seems artificially random, as if that's not how photography works, is what you've often said.
Yes.
So you sometimes said, like, this is boring, this is something meaningful, boring, and you sort of said the sequence looked placed, it didn't look like natural photography. Do you still think that's the case?
Yeah. Because reading, I mean, those images that I said, you can see them on NASA websites, where you've got all the individual pictures from every mission in sequence, allegedly. If you read the sequence they're in, it doesn't make any sense. That one of the Apollo 12, where you've got the 8 pictures, only 2 of which appear to have any degree of sense about them, it's not a logical sequence to photograph in. Let's see if I can find it. Ironically, the ones of Apollo 11, the 8 in sequence, are relatively straightforward. They're what you would expect. Yeah, see that is not a logical sequence, because when you take photographs on film, the first thing you do when you develop them and process them and got the negatives, or in this case, negatives here, which is what comes out of this film here, you get a negative, and then you print the positive image from it. So there's a black and white, and what they would be called contact sheets, where you take every image you've taken on your film, it's 36 on one of these, and you just print them. So you get the sequence you took the pictures in. And if you can read it, you'll see what the photographer was trying to achieve. He builds up towards the image which is normally chosen towards the end of the roll. That appears to make no sense. These are very good images, but these have absolutely nothing to do with anything. They're just pictures of the ground.
But would you argue if a professional photographer took the photographs, he would then do as you suggested, or is it like a double bluff?
Well, if a professional photographer took them, what may have happened, I've got no evidence for it, a professional photographer would have taken lots and lots and lots of pictures. That's one of the points about photography. You take as many photographs as you can, you hope you get the good one. They may well have just selected a certain number of photographs as if that is what they had been doing, without any consideration for it being realistic. Because these are not realistic. Those two of the astronauts are very good pictures, and that's why you see them reproduced so often. But have you ever seen any of those pictures? They're supposed to be stereoscopic images, which is why they look fairly similar. A stereoscopic image would be a photograph taken slightly a few inches apart. So when you look, because our eyes are about 4 inches apart, if you take two photographs of the same object 4 inches apart, that will produce a 3D image projected. That's what they're trying to do there. Reasonable thing to attempt. So going back to what you said, where did I first come across it? Yes, that was where I first heard about it, about 25 years ago. And to try to find out if it was real, because I watched it. You can tell I'm old enough to have watched it. I waved out the window, nobody waved back. I was in London at the time. I thought it was incredible. I thought it was a great achievement. I'm a great enthusiast for space travel. I love all these rockets and astronauts and things going on. But to find out that it's faked, fabricated for political reasons. Right, I've got over the disappointment. And now I'm going to watch NASA make a complete and utter fool of themselves, try to get back to the moon. Apollo allegedly landed a man on the moon. The new program is called Artemis. Do you know who Artemis is? Apollo's twin sister. Are they going to land a woman on the moon? Is it going to be Ivanka Trump?
Won't it be a gender-neutral person they land on?
Good thinking. Well, they'll have to come up with a different name. But they haven't got a rocket that can take anybody to the moon yet. They talk about it. It's called the Space Launch System. It's never been tested in its full-out mode. They haven't got a lander.
It's the third reboot, though, isn't it, I think, of the moon program, because they had Constellation and they had the other program, didn't they? The Bush program and the Obama program.
That's the president's dilemma.
Yeah.
G.W. Bush says, we're going to go back to Mars. So we had the Constellation program. Obama comes along and says, forget Mars. No, forget the moon, we're going to go to Mars. I want to see it in my lifetime. Trump comes along and says, forget Mars, let's just get back to the moon. That started 15 years ago, all this discussion.
Yeah.
And they still have to use Russian rockets to get to the International Space Station. I mean, it's pathetic. And NASA, the big row, do you see the big row? That one of the most senior people within NASA, he was in charge of human spaceflight, get this, in charge of human spaceflight, was sacked a few months before his retirement. He's had 42 years of NASA.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're sacked. Because Trump has appointed the Jim Bridenstine is the head of NASA, who used to be a congressman. And I think Trump said, get rid of that guy, he's done nothing. We're paying him a fortune, we don't need to get somebody else in. I think Trump knows more than he's talking about. But as president, he can't call out NASA. He wants them to show how incompetent they are without any effort from anybody else. So he says, I want to be back on the moon by 2024. Happens to be the end of his second term, assuming he's re-elected. If they can't do it, what on earth have they been doing for the last 50 years? They haven't been flying rockets, that's for sure.
Yes, they fake it again.
Hmm?
They make another fake moon mission.
Too many people are watching.
It's more difficult nowadays.
Too many people are fully aware of the problems.
It's not like the
NASA
60s.
know that, and that's their problem, that they can't fool people the second time. Fool me once, shame on, what's that phrase? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I'm not going to get shamed the second time. Enough people are aware of the problems and will be asking the question, well, what about a heat shield? You know, you're supposed to be able to use a heat shield. What's the problem? Use what they used on Apollo. Go and take, get some pictures. See, digital cameras are quite different from film cameras. Digital cameras work in space. No dispute about that. It's the film camera that doesn't.
There's a series of articles on all this, one by Phil Coops, what could be learned from Apollo. There's a series of 3 articles that go through a lot of the things you're saying, isn't there?
Yeah.
Heat shield and
Yes.
the other things that they should have been able to redo by now, and they can't.
That's right. Yeah, the
Very good
film,
articles.
yes. It's a series on Owlis, AULIS, owlis.com.
Yeah.
Yes. They have the word moon base in them.
That's
in the
right,
title.
Towards the Moon Base, I think is the first one.
Yes.
Moon Base, and then Moon Base 2, Moon Base 3 is the URL,
Yeah.
I think.
By Phil Coots.
Phil Coops, which is a pseudonym.
Yeah. He lives in New Zealand. He's a physicist. And he just quotes from NASA's own documentation.
Yeah.
It's really very tragic that they've got to that stage.
I'll try and challenge you, Marcus.
Come on, Ben.
Do you want me to? Curious Droid, the guy who looks a bit like me, he's not my twin brother. He did a video the other day about the F1 engines on the Saturn V rocket, and he said the reason they can't be just simply rebuilt and adapted, and the reason the line's finished now completely. They finished it when they built the last rocket in 1974. But he said that its whole design system is completely different. The methods, the materials, everything. For example, it had far more moving parts or more components than a modern design rocket would. And he said they try to, you can actually, using this engineering program for rocket design,
Yeah.
you can do you can do it virtually. You can redesign it virtually.
Yeah.
But this is according to him. This is why he thinks. He says this explains Phil Coots' conundrum about how why don't they just readapt the Saturn V.
Yeah. Yes, that's Curious Droid is the name he uses on YouTube. His name is Paul Shilliter. And he does look quite like Ben. Not nearly as handsome or as intelligent. But he certainly does some very well presented, quite short films. Worth checking him out. It's always worth checking out the other side, as it
I don't
were.
have shirts like him either.
His shirts are very colourful. And there's what's her name? Amy Title, Vintage Space. She's the only female in the sort of promoting Apollo. Everybody else is male. It seems to be a very male-dominated area. But Paul Shilliter has done some good film. And one of them, as you say, is talking about the F1 engine. Now, there were over 60 F1 engines built. Most of them were launched, and they're now at the bottom of the Atlantic. And Jeff Bezos has recovered a couple of them. You'd think it would be possible to back-engineer them, or re-engineer them. The excuse for that is that each engine is individually constructed. It was made by a group of engineers. They didn't record what they did. So it's not possible to recreate it, which is complete nonsense.
I saw a thing with Brian Cox a few weeks ago, and him and Darla were in Kennedy Space Center. And they were saying they've got one of the Saturn V rockets in there
Yes, they have.
that they were going to use to get to the next space project or something. So is that actually happening now?
Well, yes, there is a Saturn V rocket at the Kennedy Space Center. I don't know if it's got engines. They've got.
Well, this was the engine. They were saying that they were well engineered, over engineered.
Yes, they were.
And they calculated, I can't remember the exact figures, but they had to run it at something like 115% maximum
Wow.
for
Yeah.
something like 60 or 80 something seconds, which they just achieved that. So that demonstrated that they would be able to lift the payload up and the rocket and everything up to get it out of the Earth's orbit.
Well, yes, there's a certain amount of problem with that because the Saturn V, the big rocket, was first tested with unmanned. It was unmanned on Apollo 6. I think it was April '67. Apollo 6. It was the first full-up test of the Saturn V rocket. And the report was that if there'd been astronauts on board, they wouldn't have been able to control the craft because it had what's called combustion instability. I mean, you've got these 5 huge engines. They produce over 600 tons of thrust each. 1.5 million pounds of thrust. And to create that amount of thrust, you've got to pump a vast amount of fuel and oxidizer into the combustion chamber and then ignite it. If it doesn't ignite evenly, you get what's called the pogo effect, where you get this. And the rocket basically shakes itself apart. Apollo 6 very nearly did that. From then, Apollo 6 through Apollo 7, which was Earth orbit, was Saturn 1. It wasn't the full up 5. Apollo 8 went to the moon, orbited the moon 8 times and came back. It hadn't been tested. The only previous test of the Saturn V was this virtual failure. And yet they launched this thing with 3 astronauts on board to go to the moon in 1968 because they thought the Russians were about to beat them to it. The way the Russians convinced America that they were about to do it was they launched an unmanned rocket in, I think it was September 1968. Apollo 8 was December 1968. They launched this unmanned rocket with a tape recorder on board of a cosmonaut saying, "Oh, we're getting close to the moon. It's really quite an interesting sight." And they broadcast this, and America fell for it. It's called suckering in the idiots. And they believed it, so they thought, "Oh, we got to run." Just before Apollo 8 was launched, James Webb, who was the head of NASA and the driving force behind the rocket, resigned. We don't know why. Yet the official explanation is he had achieved his objective and he wanted to retire. And I think he was terrified that the thing was going to go belly up and he was going to take the blame for it. So we got Apollo 8. And we get Apollo 9, Earth orbit again, testing, which is what should have happened before Apollo 8, testing the craft and the re-entry. Then we get Apollo 10, which is to the moon, unmanned. No, Apollo 10, manned to the moon but don't land. Then Apollo 11 and so on. Then we get the space opera of Apollo 13. But all these rockets worked fine from Apollo 10, or 8, 10, right through to 17. They all worked absolutely perfectly. There was no problem at all. Until Skylab. Skylab was one of the unused Saturn V rockets. Because Nixon cancelled 3 of the missions, 18, 19 and 20. Nixon cancelled them to save money. I don't know why he was saving money, because they'd all been built, all been paid for. So one of those was used for Skylab, which was the American, basically the predecessor to the International Space Station, that was so badly damaged by the vibration on the launch that it was considered lost. The solar panels were almost destroyed. This is only into Earth orbit. So suddenly you've got a rocket working perfectly well, all the way up to the point where it doesn't actually need to work very well. Then we get the Apollo-Soyuz linker, again a Saturn V rocket. It makes no sense at all, the whole story. because when it should have, and reading the Russians, see what's happened now is that the Russians have got access to all the Apollo record. In the 60s they didn't have that. They only had access to what we in the West had. They weren't idiots, they could read English, they could read all the magazines and watch all the films. So they knew it as much as anybody else did. If you're going to do something in public, the enemy knows about it as well as you. And the Russians were following one of the Art of War's great sayings, never interfere with an enemy when he's destroying himself. Trump follows that at the moment. So it's great. Yeah.
On the subject of back engineering, have you ever had a project to build a complete working replica of the Titanic? It's planned to have more lifeboats than the original for obvious reasons. Apart from that, it's going to be completely authentic and with all the same materials and engineering, and they're doing it from the original plans.
Because they've kept the plans.
Yeah. Well, it's all exactly unlike NASA. This is much older. It's going back like to the beginning of the 20th century that this class was designed.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think they can rebuild the Titanic and put it to sea and not rebuild the Saturn rockets and make them better with our modern technology.
Yeah.
And make them better than the originals and fly them into space.
Yeah.
And they're only 50 years old. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, hopefully they've engineered the new Titanic so that with better navigation equipment, so you can see an iceberg ahead of
Let's
them.
make something like that. Yeah, that'll be another.
I mean, all these wonderful stories of the Titanic that, because of the conditions at the time, the iceberg was not visible because of the sea mist that was coming off at the time. And anyway, it was an unsinkable ship, so it didn't matter if it hit an iceberg. Icebergs tend to win.
I'd be willing to take a trip on a Titanic, but I wouldn't go up on a Saturn V. I'd rather go up on a TR3B.
Yeah. Right,
Any last questions?
any other nice technical questions?
Not really technical, but what do you make of Neil Armstrong's statement that he saw UFOs around a crater on the moon?
I like that. Yeah, it's an interesting point. Yes, Neil Armstrong claims to have seen reporting on
He actually did a sketch of it.
Yes.
Because I'm wondering what motivated him to do it and what you actually make of it, given that they never went there. Or how he could...
He couldn't see them unless he'd been there, could he?
No.
So he must have been there.
Well...
Now,
or is he just
there
trying to
are all
work out-
sorts of stories.
Yeah.
UFOs were following us to the moon.
Yeah.
All these stories point to the fact that they must have been there to see them because they're honest people, these astronauts. There are other reports. I mean, there are reports from virtually all the Apollo missions that they saw anomalous lights on the surface. They may have done.
Yeah.
There's no photograph of it. There's no record of it. I've never heard that the audio of Armstrong making that comment.
No.
That originated, I believe, at a UN meeting in Rome where Armstrong was being asked in a private conversation about what he saw on the moon, and this is what he answered. And he was being overheard by somebody who reported it. The problem with all these reports of UFOs and astronauts on the moon is there's no physical evidence for it. It's a good story. I mean, the other one of that is that, well, there were amateur ham radio operators listening in as they went to the moon. Yeah, I've even read the transcripts of what they're supposed to have heard, but I haven't seen the official transcript of it.
No.
Now, it's perfectly possible to listen in to a conversation by the moon if you've transmitted the conversation to the moon in the first place and it's bounced off, as we discovered with lasers. Perfectly possible. Whether that happened or not, I don't know. It is certainly true that there was a Russian craft, Lunar 15 I think it's called, which was going to the moon exactly the same time as Apollo 11. And NASA were concerned that the two craft wouldn't interfere with each other. So the Russians, being generous of people, said, well, these are our coordinates, this is the path we're going to take, this is how we're going to do it. Track us if you like. Jodrell Bank was being used to track the Russian craft, not Apollo. That's the mistake a lot of people make. It wasn't tracking Apollo. Well, no, that's not quite true. It was tracking Apollo, but they were using the 50-foot dish, not the 250-foot dish, which was tracking the Russian craft. And there's a wonderful little graph that is produced on this sort of occasion, which shows the Apollo 11 descent onto the lunar surface, and you can see where Armstrong took over manual control. Yeah, I can draw a graph like that too. It's not difficult if you know in advance the path it's going to take.
Yeah, sure.
And it's produced as evidence. They weren't tracking Apollo.
No.
This is something that is filled in later. So there's a lot of these fictitious stories put out, maybe by an organisation who might be referred to as the Klans in America, to try to persuade the world that it was happening.
Yeah.
But the film of these Apollo chappies jumping around on the moon, there's one thing that cannot be faked. No matter how slow motion you make it. I mean, slow motion is what we expect to see on the moon. Quite why it's slow motion, I don't know. Unless they were so used to training underwater that it is a slow motion movement. And that's how they thought it would be on the moon. There's two things about the gravity on the moon. We know it's 1/6 of that of Earth. When we stand on Earth, right, I weigh 14 stone, so I'm going to have 180 or 90 kilos of weight on my feet. That creates friction between my feet and the surface I'm walking on. If you remove all but 1/6 of that weight, I orbit about 30 pounds, the friction between my feet and the surface will be like I'm walking on ice. Much less friction. Why weren't they falling over? Why weren't they slipping over? Because the friction is just so much less, but it doesn't show it in the film. And the one thing you can't fake in a film is the dirt being kicked up. When the astronauts walking along and they kick dirt, that happened quite a lot. The best one to show it is when it's called a jump salute. Apollo 16, they salute. They jump about so high off the ground, because they can't get any higher. And as they jump, sand is obviously kicked up, but the sand goes back down to the surface at twice the speed they do. If you compare that to a beach volleyball player filmed a similar sort of situation, a beach volleyball player will jump up in the air, hit the ball over the net, and you see the sand coming up, and he goes down, and the sand goes down at the same time. So these films are faked, and they couldn't put all these little grains of dirt on wires. So they had to assume nobody would notice. They have. They called it out. So we've got all these anomalies in the Apollo record.
Early on in your presentation, you said that the Tor value on the moon was like 0.00001, whatever it was. How does anybody know that?
How do people know that?
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know. Good question. That's the first time.
Like still, yeah.
It's probably to do with the amount of matter within a given volume of space. Right. The atmosphere we've got here, 14.8 pounds per square inch. If you take a square foot, it's got a ton of air pressing down there. If you take all the air out from underneath it, yes, it will have a ton of air, and it will collapse whatever it is. You look at that in relation to the lunar lander, which had a door that measured 30 inches square by 900 square inches, and it had a 5 pound per square inch in the pressure. That's 2.5 tons of air on a piece of aluminium. Forget it, not going to happen. I believe it's a calculation. Let me do it. If you go onto Wikipedia and just check on Tor value, it will give you the information there. It's to do with the amount of molecules of matter within a given area of space. Obviously here we've got a lot of air molecules. Even on the International Space Station, there's not many. On the moon, there's even less. Because of all that global warming, the carbon dioxide plant food, carbon dioxide. We need it.
Yeah.
Let's not go there, shall we?
That's all right. No.
So yeah, I think it's 10 to the minus, what did it say? 10 to the minus 7,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is not very much. Yeah, try Tor. That should give.
Marcus, have you actually seen the film footage that they saw in Australia with the coke can on the film set?
Was it mentioned in Dark Man?
Yes, it's in Dark Moon, and it's referred to in the film What Happened on the Moon, which you can see online now. That's the film of the book, basically. Una MacDonald is the lady. She's interviewed by David Percy, and that's what she claimed she saw. A Coke bottle rolling across the set. And she was so startled by it, she phoned her friends up and said, watch it when they repeat it, you'll probably see this Coke bottle. Nobody ever did, because obviously they cut that bit out. But that was a genuine interview, and she was quite, if you see her on film, she appears to be telling the truth. Now, I've never seen the film, and nobody's ever been able to find it. Nobody's ever seen a reference to it. But she was in Perth, in Western Australia, and the film of the moon walk, which she was referring to, the landing of Apollo 11, was being picked up at Honeysuckle Creek, which is in Queensland, I think, in Australia, i.e. the other side of Australia. It was transmitted in Australia direct to Perth from Honeysuckle Creek, which is where the receiver was. It was also then transmitted by satellite back to Houston. From Houston it was transmitted to the rest of the world. So what she saw was a piece of film that nobody else saw. And we now know that that's correct because of the transmission from Honeysuckle Creek through the Australian broadcasting system. It was different from the Houston broadcasting system. So she may well have seen something. I'd love to see it. And she's adamant she did see it.
Right, I think we better draw the evening to a close.